Rhode Island may be the smallest state, but it holds some of New England's deepest mysteries, from the puzzling carvings of the Narragansett runestone to the lost villages beneath Scituate Reservoir and the ruins of Hanton City. Each site hides forgotten stories of explorers, settlers, and ancient people who left behind more questions than answers. Newport Tower. In the heart of Newport, Rhode Island, there's a small park called Touro Park. Tourists wander through with ice cream cones and strollers, most of them glancing only briefly at the stone tower sitting quietly among the trees. But if you stop and really look, you'll notice that it doesn't fit. The arches are uneven, the stones are rough, and the whole structure looks older than everything around it. Locals call it the Newport Tower. Officially, it's said to be a colonial windmill built in the 1600s. Unofficially, it's one of New England's most stubborn mysteries. The tower stands about 28 feet tall, made of weathered stone and mortar. It rests on 8 arches, like an ancient monument that somehow ended up in a quiet American town. For centuries, people have argued over who built it. Some say it was Governor Benedict Arnold's windmill, built in the 1660s, modeled after mills he'd seen in England. That's the most accepted version. But there are other stories that pull the tower far away from colonial Rhode Island and into a world of Vikings, Templars, and explorers who may have crossed the ocean long before Columbus. One of the earliest alternative theories came from the Danish archaeologist Carl Rafnen in the 1830s. He believed the tower was built by Norse explorers who might have reached North America around the year 1000. Rafnen even connected it to the Viking sagas that described a place called Vinland. To him, the rounded stone arches and circular layout looked Scandinavian. People loved the idea. It gave Newport an ancient, almost mythical past. Later, others claimed it was built by the Knights Templar, the secretive medieval order rumored to have sailed west after being outlawed in Europe. They pointed to supposed astronomical alignments in the arches, saying the openings marked sunrise or sunset on solstices. It was mysterious, romantic, and completely unproven, but it stuck. Then came theories about Chinese explorers, Portuguese navigators, and even pre-Columbian Irish monks. Each idea seemed to reflect the hopes of whoever proposed it, that maybe, just maybe, their culture had touched American soil before anyone else. The more you stand in front of the Newport Tower, the easier it is to see why people can't agree. It feels ancient. The stones are rough and uneven, not the neat work you'd expect from a colonial windmill. Lichens crawl over the surface. You can still see bits of seashell and sand in the mortar. Inside, the arches make the space echo oddly, as if it swallows sound. When sunlight filters through the openings, it lands in strange patterns. You can't help wondering if those patterns meant something once, if someone built it that way on purpose. But the evidence for a colonial origin is hard to ignore. In the 1940s, archaeologists found bits of 17th century charcoal and building debris beneath the tower, matching Governor Arnold's lifetime. His will even refers to "my stone-built windmill," and that's strong proof. Yet people still doubt, maybe because it's too strange-looking for a mere windmill, or maybe because we like mysteries better than answers. Even now, there are small clues that don't quite fit. Some argue the tower's thick walls are unnecessary for a windmill. Others note its circular design is unlike any confirmed New England windmill from that period. And there's a question about its foundation. It's built directly over an earlier structure, possibly from before Arnold's time. Every discovery seems to answer one question and raise 2 more. If you visit on a foggy morning, when the air smells like salt and wet stone, it feels almost sacred. The arches frame the fog like a veil, and for a moment you can imagine monks in robes or explorers studying the stars. Then a car passes by, and you remember you're in downtown Newport, surrounded by cafes and galleries. That clash, the old and the new, is part of the tower's charm, its history refusing to sit neatly in its box. There's also something quietly human about the whole debate. The tower is like a mirror. It reflects what people want to see. To historians, it's a colonial relic. To dreamers, it's proof that history might be bigger and stranger than we're told. And to locals, it's just the tower in the park, something familiar that still manages to feel mysterious after all these years. I've stood there myself, tracing the stone with my hand. The surface feels coarse, cold even on a summer day. You can see where the mortar crumbled, where nature has started to take back the edges. It's not grand, not towering or polished, but it holds a quiet weight. You feel that whoever built it, colonist or explorer, put effort and belief into it. That's the part that's hard to shake. Over time, people have searched for hidden messages. Amateur archaeologists have measured every opening, checked compass bearings, and looked for runes or carvings. Some claim to see crosses in the layout, or alignments with constellations. Others dismiss that as wishful thinking. The truth is, the tower doesn't explain itself. It's too plain for a temple, too elaborate for a simple mill. That gap between what it is and what it looks like is where the mystery lives. Modern studies with ground-penetrating radar and carbon dating haven't revealed any surprises. Everything points back to the mid-1600s. Still, the legend refuses to die. Even local tour guides will smile and say, "That's what the historians say," before lowering their voice to share a wilder theory. It's become part of Newport's identity, half history, half myth. The tower's condition today is fair. It's been stabilized and fenced off to protect it, though visitors can walk right up to the arches. The stonework shows its age, with cracks and weather stains, but it's holding together. On sunny weekends, it's a spot for photos and picnics. On quiet days, it feels almost forgotten. Some complain that it's underappreciated, that it deserves more care and explanation. Others like that it still feels untouched, not overrun by souvenir stands or bright plaques telling you exactly what to think. The negatives are mostly from neglect. Graffiti shows up now and then, the surrounding park can feel a bit worn, and modern traffic noise kills some of the mystery. But there's a positive side too. It's freely accessible, open to anyone, and it still stirs curiosity. That's rare. Most old structures fade into the background, but this one keeps people arguing and wondering. In the end, whether it's a Viking outpost or a colonial windmill, doesn't really change its power. The mystery itself is what keeps it alive. When you stand there feeling the rough stone and hearing the gulls from the harbor, you realize that every generation needs a few questions without easy answers. The Newport Tower gives Rhode Island exactly that. It's a puzzle that refuses to solve itself. Today, Toro Park is quiet except for the hum of passing cars and the chatter of tourists. The tower stands exactly where it always has, weathering the salt air and time itself. Its purpose may never be fully known, and maybe that's how it should be. Some mysteries are worth keeping unsolved, not because we can't find the answer, but because the not knowing reminds us that history still has secrets left to tell. Hanton City. Deep in the woods of Smithfield, Rhode Island, there's a place locals call Hanton City, the lost city of Rhode Island. It's not really a city, and it hasn't been for centuries. Today, it's a tangle of trees, moss-covered foundations, and stone walls half swallowed by the forest. There are no signs leading you there. You have to find it by instinct, or with an old map, or by following a dirt path that seems to lead nowhere. Once you're inside, it feels like stepping into another time. Quiet, eerie, and strangely peaceful. Hanton City is one of those places that hides in plain sight. Most people in Smithfield drive past the woods every day without knowing what's buried there. Historians believe it was settled sometime in the 1700s, but no one knows exactly by whom. The land wasn't easy to live on. It's rocky, uneven, and far from any major road. That alone makes its existence a mystery. Why would anyone choose to build a small village here, deep in the forest? Some say the settlers were exiles, people pushed out from nearby towns for reasons that were never recorded. Others think they were runaway indentured servants or debtors trying to live off the grid. There's also a darker theory that Hanton City was a community of people with leprosy or other illnesses sent away from the public. It's the kind of story that has no proof, but it fits the mood of the place. Walk through the ruins, and you'll find the remnants of stone foundations, low walls running in odd directions, and the crumbled remains of what might have been a mill or small dam. There are also reports of an old burial ground, though most of the stones are either missing or sunken into the ground. The trees have grown thick around them, their roots curling through what used to be homes. When you're there, it's easy to believe that the forest has been trying to erase the memory of the people who lived here. Old town records mention the area faintly. There are references to Hanton City Road, and a few names of families who might have lived nearby. One name that comes up often is Hanton, or sometimes Hanton's Town. It's likely the name came from one of the early settlers, though the details have faded over time. No one knows when the last residents left, only that by the early 1900s, the place was abandoned. People who have hiked out there describe a strange silence. The woods are thick, and even birds seem to quiet down the deeper you go. You can feel a change in the air, a kind of pressure or stillness that doesn't match the normal feel of a forest. It's probably just the dense canopy and isolation, but it gives the place a haunted quality. Some say they've heard whispers, or the sound of someone walking behind them when no one is there. Others say at night you can see faint lights like lanterns moving between the trees. I've been out there myself once with a friend who grew up nearby. We followed a dirt trail off Hanton City Trail Road until the path disappeared into tall grass. Then we found the first wall, a low row of stones, perfectly stacked, vanishing into the undergrowth. The deeper we walked, the more ruins appeared. One after another, all quiet, all forgotten. We found what looked like the base of a fireplace and a shallow depression that might have been a cellar. You could almost picture a small cottage standing there centuries ago. It's strange to think about how a whole community could vanish without leaving much trace. There were likely only a few families, but they built homes, raised children, worked the land, and then simply left. Maybe they were forced out by poverty. Maybe the soil gave up. Or maybe their descendants just moved closer to town. Whatever the reason, nature moved in fast. By the time anyone came looking again, Hanton City was already becoming part of the forest. Over the years, the mystery has deepened with every retelling. Ghost hunters love the place. Some claim to have seen shadowy figures or heard children laughing faintly through the trees. There are also rumors about an invisible barrier or feeling that makes people lose their sense of direction out there. Most of it is folklore, passed along at campfires or on online forums. But when you're standing there, surrounded by half-buried stones, it's easy to understand how those stories started. What makes Hanton City unique isn't just the mystery of who lived there, it's the atmosphere. The land has an energy that feels both calm and unsettling. The walls and foundations are built with care, using local stone, and you can still trace the layout of small homesteads. Whoever these people were, they built something meant to last, even if they couldn't stay. The positive side of this forgotten place is that it's still accessible to anyone curious enough to find it. Hikers, historians, and local explorers keep the memory alive by visiting and documenting what remains. There's no ticket booth, no guide, just raw history sitting quietly under the trees. It's one of the few places in Rhode Island where you can see time standing still. You can walk among the stones and know that you're standing where families once worked, prayed, and survived the harsh winters centuries ago. But there are negatives too. The site isn't protected, and vandalism has taken its toll. Some of the stones have been moved or broken by careless visitors. In a few spots, you can see spray paint on the old walls. Trash sometimes collects near the trails, a reminder that curiosity can be destructive when it isn't paired with respect. Erosion and tree roots are also wearing the structures down. Without official care, Hanton City is slowly disappearing back into the ground. Still, there's something powerful about how it endures. Even without signs or fences, people keep finding their way there. They bring cameras, sketchbooks, or just quiet wonder. They try to piece together a story from what's left. You could call it history, or folklore, or both. But whatever it is, it speaks to our fascination with the forgotten. If you go there today, you'll find the trail rough and unmarked in places. It's easy to lose your bearings, especially in summer when the undergrowth is thick. In winter, the bare trees reveal more of the ruins, but the cold makes the place feel even lonelier. The air is damp and the stones sweat with moisture. It's haunting, but in a beautiful way, like the forest is protecting what's left of its secret. Standing there, I couldn't decide whether I felt sad or peaceful. There's loss in those ruins, but also resilience. The people who built this hidden settlement didn't leave grand buildings or written records. They left small traces enough to remind us they were real. That's what I find most human about it. Their story might never be fully known, but it still lingers, whispering through the branches. Today, Hanton City exists mostly as a name on old maps, and the memories of hikers who've gone looking for it. The woods keep most of it to themselves. Stone walls snake through the trees, connecting nothing, marking boundaries that don't matter anymore. The cemetery, if it still exists, is just a few flat stones under leaves. The silence is heavy, but not frightening. It's the kind of silence that makes you listen harder to the wind, to your own breath, to the ghosts of a story no one finished writing. That's the mystery of Hanton City. It's not about ghosts or hidden treasure. It's about time itself, and how easily human lives can be swallowed by it. What's left are clues scattered like breadcrumbs, and the feeling that something important happened there once, even if we'll never know exactly what. Tomaquag rock shelters. If you drive through the quiet back roads of Hopkinton, Rhode Island, you might pass right by one of the most ancient and mysterious places in the state without realizing it. Hidden beneath low granite overhangs, tucked into the woods near Tomaquag Brook, are a set of rock shelters that hold stories thousands of years old. They're known as the Tomaquag rock shelters, a small cluster of stone recesses that once offered protection, warmth, and a place to live for people long before the first European ever set foot in New England. At first glance, they don't look like much. To a casual hiker, they might seem like ordinary outcrops, the kind you'd find scattered all over southern Rhode Island. But archaeologists who studied this site discovered something incredible, traces of human life stretching back nearly 3,000 years. Beneath the layers of soil and fallen leaves, they found stone tools, hearths, animal bones, and flakes from tool making. The oldest shelter dated to around 800 BC, another to about AD 800. That's a gap of more than 1,000 years, meaning generations of people returned to these same rocks for shelter and survival. Standing there today, surrounded by the stillness of the woods, it's easy to picture why they chose this place. The granite outcrops form natural roofs, just high enough to stand under, with a dry floor protected from the wind. Tomaquag Brook runs nearby, offering fresh water and fish. The land around it once teemed with deer, turkey, and other game. For early peoples, likely ancestors of the Narragansett, it was an ideal seasonal home. They could hunt, fish, and gather here, leaving behind the quiet traces of their lives in the earth. The archaeological digs here revealed a window into those lives. In one shelter, researchers found the remains of ancient campfires, charcoal and ash still visible in the soil. In another, they uncovered small stone flakes, the byproduct of shaping spear points or knives. These weren't ceremonial sites or fortresses, they were lived-in spaces, intimate and human. You can imagine families sitting by the fire, cooking, sharpening tools, maybe telling stories as the night settled in. When I visited, I tried to imagine the sounds of that world, the crackling of fire against stone, the rush of the brook, the soft rhythm of someone chipping at a rock to make a blade. The shelters themselves are quiet now, their entrances draped with moss and roots. A few fallen branches lean across them like nature's way of guarding what's left. There's a strong sense of presence there, even though the people who built their lives here vanished centuries ago. One of the things that makes the Tomaquag rock shelters so mysterious is how little is known about the people who used them. The site spans such a large period that it's hard to say whether the same culture returned again and again, or if different groups discovered it at different times. Archaeologists found artifacts that suggest the late Archaic and Woodland periods, meaning this area saw continuous or repeated use across changing eras. But beyond the artifacts, the stories are silent. We have no names, no written words, just the stones and the soil to speak for them. What's remarkable, though, is the continuity. For thousands of years, humans across generations found the same outcrops and used them the same way. That kind of connection across time is rare. It shows how the land itself held meaning, how it provided what was needed, and drew people back even as cultures evolved. To me, that says something profound about human nature, our instinct to seek shelter, to make home wherever the earth allows. There's a quiet humility in this site. Unlike grand ruins or towering monuments, the Tomaquag rock shelters are small, almost hidden. You have to stoop to enter some of them. They weren't built to impress, they were shaped by necessity. Yet the simplicity is what makes them powerful. When you stand inside one of those shallow caves and look out at the woods, you see almost the same view the first inhabitants saw. The landscape hasn't changed much. Still the same rolling stone, the same trees, the same smell of damp earth. It's one of those rare moments where you can feel time folding in on itself. There are, of course, mysteries that still surround the site. Some researchers believe the shelters were used primarily for seasonal hunting trips, temporary homes during certain parts of the year. Others think small family groups may have lived there longer, perhaps using the area as a base for fishing and trading. A few theories even suggest ceremonial or spiritual significance, since rock shelters often had sacred meanings in indigenous cultures. But because the site is fragile and limited excavations have been done, those answers remain open. Unfortunately, the very same isolation that preserved the shelters for centuries also makes them vulnerable now. The positives are easy to see. The site is still intact in parts, surrounded by peaceful forest, largely untouched by heavy development. It's a place of education and reflection, studied by archaeologists and visited by those interested in Rhode Island's earliest history. But the negatives are becoming harder to ignore. Some shelters have been damaged by erosion and careless visitors. Without strong protection, even a few footprints or shifts in the soil can disturb what remains of the past. Local preservation efforts have helped somewhat. The area is recognized as an archaeological site, and the artifacts found there are now safely stored and studied. Still, it's not widely marked or fenced, partly to keep it safe from looting. That means most people don't even know it exists. You can hike nearby trails and never realize you're walking above one of the oldest known habitations in New England. It's a quiet paradox. To protect it, it has to stay a secret. When I think about the Tomaquag rock shelters, I can't help feeling both awe and sadness. Awe because it's a direct link to the first Rhode Islanders, people who lived in balance with the land long before the concept of Rhode Island even existed. Sadness, because so much of their world is gone, reduced to fragments of stone and charcoal. But even in those fragments there's a beauty, a reminder of endurance. The people who sheltered here survived storms, winters, and the slow passage of centuries. Their presence still echoes in the granite, in the quiet air of the woods. If you visit, you'll notice how the sounds of the modern world fade away as you approach. The air gets cooler under the rock, and your voice carries differently, bouncing off the stone. You realize this was once a home, maybe several homes, layered over time, and while the world around it changed completely, these shelters stayed the same, waiting, watching, holding their secrets. Today, the Tomaquag rock shelters are studied mostly through controlled digs and environmental monitoring. Access is limited to prevent damage, but nearby educational centers like the Tomaquag Museum help keep the history alive. The woods themselves are dense and alive with birds and insects. The shelters are quiet, their interiors darkened by centuries of smoke and shade. Some stones bear faint marks, maybe from tools, maybe from nature. No one knows for sure. The positive side of the present is that these shelters still exist, still capable of teaching us about the deep past of this land. The negative is how fragile they've become. Without constant care, the soil erodes, the roots spread, and small pieces of history slip away. Still, there's a sense that the land wants to keep its memories. It's held on to them this long. As you walk away from the site through the trees and toward the sound of running water, you feel a strange connection, not to the mystery of what's unknown, but to the people who once stood where you're standing. They weren't ancient in their own eyes. They were simply living, cooking, talking, resting, trying to stay warm. The Tomaquag rock shelters remind us that history isn't just written in books. Sometimes it's carved quietly into stone, waiting for someone to listen. Lost villages under Scituate Reservoir. If you drive west of Providence, the land starts to rise gently, and the air feels cleaner, quieter. Somewhere beyond those forests and rolling hills lies the Scituate Reservoir, Rhode Island's largest body of fresh water. It's calm and beautiful now, but beneath its blue surface rests the ghostly remains of several lost villages. It's one of those places where the silence feels heavy, as if the land still remembers what it once held. Back in the early 1900s, Rhode Island was growing fast, and the city of Providence needed more water. Wells and smaller reservoirs weren't enough to meet the demand, so in 1915, engineers and state officials began scouting a location for a new, massive water source. The Scituate region, full of rivers and low valleys, seemed perfect. But there was a problem. Nearly 1,500 people already lived there, spread across villages with names that sound like they came straight out of old New England folklore. Rockland, Kent, Ashland, South Scituate, and parts of North Scituate. These weren't tiny, forgotten hamlets either. The area had farms, schools, general stores, churches, even post offices. Some families had lived there for generations, their ancestors buried in local cemeteries. When the state decided the valley would be flooded, people were given little choice but to leave. Many fought against it, but there was no stopping the project once construction began. Between 1915 and 1925, entire communities were uprooted. Houses were dismantled, cemeteries moved, and roads rerouted. The government bought up the land, paying what most locals felt was far below its worth. For many families, it wasn't just a financial loss, it was the loss of their roots. Imagine having to watch the house your grandparents built being taken apart piece by piece, knowing it would soon be underwater forever. The reservoir officially opened in 1926. When the water gates closed, the Pawtuxet River slowly backed up, filling the valley. It swallowed barns, bridges, mills, and cellar holes that no one had time to dig up. The outlines of old stone walls and foundations disappeared beneath the new surface, like the pages of a story shut for good. To this day, the idea of those drowned towns captures people's imagination. On clear days, fishermen say you can still see the faint outlines of old roads or chimneys below the water when the light hits just right. Local legends claim that church bells once rang faintly from beneath the reservoir after it first filled, a sound carried by shifting currents or maybe just imagined by those who missed their homes. There are also stories of divers who went down near the old sites and came back unsettled. They spoke of collapsed rooftops, tangled fence lines, and trees still standing eerily upright underwater. Whether those details are true or just exaggerated, it's easy to believe that somewhere under that calm water lies a frozen snapshot of life from a century ago. Visiting the reservoir today feels strangely peaceful. It covers nearly 3,400 acres. and its quiet surface stretches between forested shores. You'll see herons gliding low over the water, deer stepping cautiously through the trees, and the occasional jogger following the trails along the perimeter. But even though it looks pristine, there's an underlying melancholy here. Signs warn you to stay away from the water's edge. The entire area is strictly protected, since it supplies drinking water for over 500,000 people in the Providence area. Swimming, fishing, or boating are all off limits. The reservoir isn't really a place for recreation. It's a place of silence. Standing by the fence, it's hard not to think about the lives beneath that still surface. Somewhere down there, beneath 80 feet of water, are the remains of Ashland's mill foundations and Kent's church steps. There are sections of old roads that used to echo with wagon wheels, now covered in layers of silt. The people who left these villages carried their memories with them, but the landscape kept its own, the outlines of fields, cellar stones, and orchard trees slowly vanishing with time. For the people who descend from those displaced families, the Scituate Reservoir is more than a water source. It's a quiet reminder of what was sacrificed for progress. Some descendants still gather each year to share stories and photos, keeping the memory of those lost villages alive. They speak about the sense of betrayal, but also a kind of acceptance, the understanding that while something precious was lost, it helped sustain millions of lives afterward. There's also a subtle irony here. What began as an act of destruction ended up preserving something else. Because the land around the reservoir was closed to development, thousands of acres of forest have regrown, creating one of the most untouched natural areas in the state. Wildlife thrives here. The air feels cooler, the roads quieter. You could almost say the drowned villages made space for a new kind of life. Still, it's impossible to shake that sense of unease, that underneath all this beauty lies a story most people never see. You can't look at the water without wondering what's hidden below. That feeling is what draws photographers and local historians back, again and again. They search for old maps, for family records, for photos of what used to be there, anything to bridge the gap between past and present. In a way, the Scituate Reservoir has become Rhode Island's own Atlantis, a real-world version of a sunken world, quiet and invisible yet always close. When you drive past it on Route 12, you might see the sunlight ripple across its surface, but it's the history underneath that gives it weight. If there's a mystery here, it's not supernatural, it's emotional. It's about what happens when progress buries memory, when an entire chapter of human life becomes invisible but not forgotten. It raises a question that still feels relevant. How much of the past are we willing to lose for the sake of the future? Today, the site is both beautiful and restricted. You can't walk down to where the old villages once stood, and there are no visible ruins above the waterline. Only a few scattered historical markers hint at what's below. The land feels calm, but also closed off as if it's protecting its secrets. The positives are clear: clean water, thriving forests, and an important piece of state infrastructure. But the negatives linger too: the erasure of communities, the silence of what used to be. If you stand there long enough, you might hear nothing but the wind through the pines. Yet in that stillness, it's easy to imagine echoes, the faint ring of a hammer from an old mill, or the laughter of children playing in a vanished yard. They're not really there, of course, but sometimes when you're looking across the reservoir, it's hard to tell where memory ends and imagination begins. The Narragansett Rune Stone. Just off the coast of Rhode Island, beneath the quiet waves of Narragansett Bay, lies a slab of stone that has puzzled locals and researchers for decades. It's called the Narragansett Rune Stone, or simply the Quidnasset Rock, and it's one of those mysteries that refuses to settle into a single explanation. It's a weathered gray piece of rock etched with markings that some believe are ancient runes, possibly Norse in origin. Others think they're nothing more than random scratches, or even a modern hoax. Whatever the truth, the stone has become one of the state's most quietly haunting legends. The story begins in the late 1980s, when the stone first came to public attention. Locals in North Kingstown had known about it for years. It rested in the shallow waters near Pojack Point, visible at low tide. Fishermen and boaters would sometimes see its markings glinting faintly under the sunlight as the tide receded. But when word spread that the carvings might resemble ancient Scandinavian writing, curiosity exploded. Rhode Island, after all, already had a history tied to mysterious structures like the Newport Tower, which some also claim has Norse origins. When researchers and amateur historians examined the stone, they found roughly 50 rune-like symbols carved across one of its flat faces. The lines were crisp but irregular, as if cut by hand tools rather than modern machinery. The question was, Who carved them, and when? One theory pointed to Viking explorers. The idea wasn't entirely far-fetched. Legends of Norsemen reaching North America long before Columbus have circulated for centuries. Archaeological finds in Newfoundland proved at least one Viking settlement existed in the 11th century. Could Rhode Island have been part of their journey southward along the Atlantic coast? To believers, the Narragansett runestone was physical proof, evidence that the Norse had explored as far as southern New England, but not everyone agreed. Many scholars argued that the marks didn't resemble authentic Norse runes at all. Some saw a mix of letters and symbols that didn't match any known language. Others believed it might have been carved by colonial settlers or fishermen from a much later time, maybe even as late as the 19th century. Without carbon dating or direct context like tools, artifacts, or structures nearby, it was impossible to pin down an age. The stone had no inscriptions explaining its purpose, and no records in local archives mentioned it. It simply existed, half submerged, carrying a mystery with no anchor. The story took an even stranger turn in 2012. One morning, residents noticed the stone was gone. It had vanished completely, apparently stolen from the bay. For a moment, it felt like Rhode Island's own version of a missing treasure story. Police launched an investigation, and local historians pleaded for its return. Months passed before it finally reappeared, found dumped near a yacht club several miles away. The person responsible was never publicly identified, but the incident made something clear. Whatever its origins, the Narragansett runestone had become part of local identity. When it was recovered, the state decided to protect it. The stone was placed in storage for years before being relocated to a safer, more accessible location near Wickford. Seeing it up close today, you can't help but feel torn. The carvings are rough and uncertain, not the work of a trained craftsman, but there's something undeniably deliberate about them. They're not random gouges. They have rhythm and spacing, a sense that whoever made them was trying to say something, even if the message is now unreadable. Some people still believe the stone connects Rhode Island to the same ancient seafarers who left their marks across the North Atlantic, from Greenland to Nova Scotia, and possibly beyond. Others see it as a local curiosity, maybe carved by a fisherman with a wild imagination, or even by early European settlers imitating ancient scripts. Then there's a smaller camp that views it as a modern hoax from the 20th century, perhaps a prank that got out of hand and turned into folklore. What makes it fascinating is how every theory seems just plausible enough to survive. There's no absolute proof either way. That uncertainty gives the stone its power. You can stand in front of it and feel like you're staring at a message from some distant hand, one that time has half erased but never fully silenced. If you visit the area where it once sat, the landscape adds to that feeling. The waters of Narragansett Bay are calm and wide, framed by rocky shores and clusters of reeds. At low tide, the bay's muddy bottom glimmers with shells and dark stones. The wind carries a hint of salt and the distant hum of passing boats. It's easy to picture a small Viking ship gliding past centuries ago, its crew scanning the unfamiliar coastline. It's just as easy to imagine a colonial fisherman pausing on a lonely afternoon, carving strange shapes into the rock for reasons only he understood. Standing by the water, I can't help but feel that the truth probably lies somewhere in between. Maybe the markings aren't from Vikings or hoaxers, but from someone lost to history, an early traveler or explorer leaving a personal mark on the world. Every culture, from ancient Norse to Native American to early European, has had people who carved symbols into stone as a way to be remembered. Perhaps this was one of them. Today, the Narragansett runestone is safe but somewhat forgotten. It sits protected, away from the tides that once washed over it. The positive side is that it won't be stolen again or worn down by waves. The negative is that it's been removed from its natural setting, the very place that gave it life and mystery. Seeing it indoors under artificial light doesn't carry the same magic as spotting it glinting in the bay under a late afternoon sun. Something about it feels quieter now, less alive. Still, it continues to draw small crowds of curious visitors, local historians, school groups, and the occasional adventurer who heard about a Viking stone hidden in Rhode Island. People study the grooves, trace the lines with their fingers, and walk away with more questions than answers. That's the mark of a true mystery. In my view, whether it's ancient or modern hardly matters anymore. What makes the Narragansett runestone meaningful is how it connects people to wonder, to the possibility that our shores hold stories older than we imagine. It reminds us that history isn't a closed book. It's a tide that keeps uncovering new things as it shifts. If you visit today, the area around Narragansett Bay is clean and well cared for. The nearby town of Wickford is small, charming, and full of colonial architecture. It's a peaceful place, not the kind you'd expect to hold an ancient mystery, but maybe that's what makes it special. The mystery sits quietly among the ordinary, a reminder that even in the smallest corners of New England, the past still hums beneath the surface.